The alarm screeched at 6 a.m., dragging me from a restless sleep. I groaned, rubbing my eyes, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My body was sore from another one of Amelia's intense workout sessions. Those fake yoga classes where she spent more time on Instagram than actually stretching. Drama queen, she teased from the bathroom, her voice light and playful. You sound like you're about to expire. I smiled despite myself. After last night? I might as well be. It was the usual back and forth banter. We always had these little jokes in the morning, a way to ease into the grind of the day. But this morning, there was something off. It hit me all at once, a sick feeling in my stomach. I couldn't pin it down at first, but then it hit me. She's cheating on me. 4 weeks now, I'd been noticing it. Her little shifts, the ways she'd pull away. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Her texts were more distant. Her phone, once something we used to share, now stayed glued to her hand, even at the dinner table. She'd always been a workaholic, but now, it was different. The air between us had thickened, like I was a ghost passing through her world. I tried to tell myself I was just paranoid. Maybe she was stressed with work. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just didn't want to face it. The kiss goodbye last night had sealed it for me. It was too routine, too mechanical. No spark, no warmth. Just a brief press of lips before she darted out the door, late for another one of her so-called meetings with clients or friends or whatever she was doing behind my back. I didn't need any more signs. I had the proof. And today, I was going to make sure she paid. Not in some out-of-control, emotional rage, but in a way she'd never see coming. I would make her feel the weight of her lies, and I wouldn't stop until she had no place to hide. Amelia thought she had it all. Her perfect career, her flawless public image. But what she didn't know was that I'd been quietly gathering everything I needed for months. Texts, emails, records, the details that would bring down everything she cared about, piece by piece. I wasn't going to ruin her life with a dramatic confrontation. No, I'd do it quietly, methodically, just like she thought she could get away with betraying me. Her world was built on the image of perfection, and I was about to shatter it. I dragged myself out of bed, sore from yet another of Amelia's intense workouts, more about flexing on social media than actually breaking a sweat. She was already dressed in her usual power outfit, tight black dress, heels that clacked against the floor like she was strutting into a boardroom, not a kitchen. Drama queen, she teased, barely looking at me. You sound like you're about to expire. I gave a half smile. After last night? Might as well be. We'd fallen into this sterile routine. No more laughs, no more stolen moments. Just her, buried in her phone, and me trying not to feel like a ghost in my own home. She glanced at the clock, grabbed her bag, and was out the door without another word. Have a good day, she said, not even meeting my eyes. Yeah. You too. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, a tightness in my chest that had been there for weeks now. Something was off, and I wasn't imagining it anymore. She was cheating on me. I'd felt it for a while. Her emotional distance, the late nights at work, the way she now smiled at me like she was talking to a stranger. But that kiss goodbye the night before, empty, routine, had solidified it. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I didn't need any more signs. I had the proof. And today, I was going to make sure she paid, but not with a big, dramatic scene. No, I was going to take her down slowly, quietly, without her even knowing it. I spent the morning getting everything together. Texts, emails, call records, the usual stuff. I wasn't trying to be flashy. I just needed something solid, something that would get her. I knew the one thing she cared about most was her career, her perfect image. That's where I'd strike. I started by setting up a decoy. Using an anonymous email, I sent her a message posing as a whistleblower from her company. I told her an internal investigation was underway about her professional conduct. The panic it would cause her? Unbelievable. She couldn't stand the thought of anyone questioning her perfection. Next, I got in touch with one of her business contacts, Darren, who'd always been a bit too eager to please. I fed him a story about a new system being rolled out at the company, a behavior tracking program. I suggested he let Amelia know, just so she wasn't caught off guard. I knew Amelia. She lived for her image, for being the top dog in the room. The idea that someone might be watching her would drive her mad. She'd start second-guessing every move, every word. Paranoia would eat her alive. And once she was on edge, that's when I'd move in for the kill. It wasn't going to be fast. It wasn't going to be messy. But it was going to be perfect. I was letting her destroy herself, piece by piece, while she thought she was in control. The next few days felt like I was living in someone else's world. Amelia didn't notice anything at first, too wrapped up in her own little bubble of success. But I could feel it. The tension was already building. She was on edge. Her usual confidence was slipping, and though she kept pretending everything was fine, I could see the cracks. Little things, like the way she checked her phone every 5 minutes, or how she'd glance nervously at the door when she thought no one was looking. The paranoia was setting in, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted satisfaction. She had no idea what was coming. I continued my quiet work behind the scenes. The decoy emails were doing their job. I could practically hear the panic in her voice when she talked to her colleagues, asking about this so-called internal investigation. But they'd all reassured her, of course. She was too important, too valuable to the company to be questioned. It only made her more anxious. The more they soothed her, the more she questioned it. But the real magic was in the second part of my plan. I had her convinced that her behavior was being monitored, that someone was watching her every move. It was the perfect storm for a woman like Amelia, obsessed with how others saw her, desperate to maintain control of her perfect image. She'd started micromanaging her actions, overthinking every email, every conversation. I could see it in the way she'd check her reflection in the windows, smoothing her hair, adjusting her posture, like she was being graded. She was already beginning to unravel, but I needed more. I needed her to completely lose it. So I made my move. I hacked into her phone, not to spy on her directly, but to track the man she was seeing behind my back. She'd been extra careful with her messages, deleting texts, switching apps, but she didn't realize I had set up a silent bug. I could see everything, the late-night texts, the covert calls, the plans they made. It was like watching a play unfold, with her the lead actress, and me watching from the shadows. But I wasn't going to confront her. That would be too easy, too satisfying. No, I wanted her to expose herself. I wanted her to drown in her own guilt. The more she tried to hide it, the more she made mistakes. She became paranoid, deleting messages, erasing emails, changing her routines. Every move she made, every secret she thought she had covered, just led her deeper into the trap I'd set. The more she tried to cover her tracks, the more she left behind. It wasn't long before I had everything I needed. The man she was sleeping with? I had the proof. The shady business deals? I had those too. And now, it was time to let her spin out of control. I was going to destroy her, quietly, and she had no idea that the fall was already coming. Amelia was unraveling, and I watched it all from the sidelines. The confident woman who once commanded every room now seemed skittish, always on edge. Her eyes darted at every noise, every phone buzz, as if waiting for some catastrophe to unfold. The control she prided herself on was slipping, and it wasn't subtle. It was in the little things, like how she'd delete messages immediately, even from friends, as if they might hold some secret. Or the way she'd check her reflection in the windows, adjusting her clothes, like she was preparing for a performance. I could see it. She was getting more paranoid. She was starting to believe she was being watched, and it was beautiful to watch her squirm. One evening, I came home to find her on the phone. She didn't know I was there yet, and I caught the last part of the conversation. Her voice, usually so controlled, was now laced with worry. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "Someone's watching me. I don't know how they know. Just lay low for a while." She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about being exposed, about the game I was playing, and the way she could feel herself getting closer to being caught. The guilt on her face wasn't about the affair. It was the fear of getting caught. It wasn't about love or regret. It was about losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. I didn't let on that I'd overheard. I just nodded and went about my evening, pretending nothing was wrong. But I knew it was working. The more she tried to control her image, the more she was crumbling under the weight of her own lies. Later that night, I moved on to the next part of my plan. I'd already planted the seeds of doubt with the decoy emails about the investigation and the surveillance system. Now it was time to go after her reputation directly. I drafted an anonymous tip about her professional conduct and sent it to some of her most trusted business partners. I knew she'd panic, not knowing where the leak was coming from. That would be enough to throw her off balance. But I wasn't stopping there. I forged an email from her to a major client, promising favors in exchange for business. Nothing huge, just enough to plant the seed of doubt. I sent it to her boss and a few key colleagues, making sure it looked like a genuine scandal. Amelia always thought she was untouchable, above reproach. But now everything she'd built, her perfect career, her flawless image, was starting to crumble. The more she tried to hide, the more I exposed her. The paranoia was getting to her. She wasn't just worried about the affair anymore. She was worried about everyone finding out. And I was going to make sure they did, quietly and methodically, until there was nothing left for her but the wreckage of her own making. By the time Saturday rolled around, Amelia was a mess. The usual calm, composed woman was now constantly fidgeting, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes, as if checking for something, someone to slip up. We were sitting on the couch, watching some random show. I could tell she wasn't really watching it. She kept glancing at her phone, then quickly hiding it like she didn't want me to see. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual even though I already knew what was going on. She met my eyes a little too quickly, flashing a fake smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long week." "Long week," I repeated. "You've been acting weird all week. You sure everything's fine?" She immediately shifted her gaze, her expression changing in a way that made it clear she was hiding something. "I'm fine. Just busy, you know how it is." I didn't push further. I could see through her act. She was unraveling. The way she shifted in her seat, the way she avoided my eyes, it was all adding up. But I kept it cool, letting her stew in the silence. She wasn't fooling me. Her mask was slipping. The next morning, things started to escalate. Amelia was even more on edge than usual. She was pacing back and forth while I made coffee, her eyes darting to the door as if she expected someone to walk in at any second. "Everything okay?" I asked again, trying to sound casual. Her eyes narrowed. "I told you I'm fine. Why do you keep asking?" I didn't answer, just handed her the coffee. She grabbed it quickly, but her gaze stayed on the phone in her hand. She looked at it like it was a bomb about to explode. Then, it buzzed again. She hesitated before picking it up, and I saw her face shift, her usual calm replaced by nervousness. Without a word, she snapped, "I need to take this," and rushed out of the kitchen. I watched her go, her movements sharp, almost frantic. Whatever was happening, it was pushing her to the edge. The cracks in her facade were widening, and she didn't even realize how obvious it was becoming. I stayed in the kitchen, trying not to smile. She didn't see it yet, but the pressure was building. Her perfect world was starting to crumble. As soon as she disappeared into the bedroom for the call, I turned my attention back to the trail I'd been carefully laying out. The emails, the tips, everything. Amelia's paranoia was only going to make it easier for me. She wasn't just worried about the affair anymore. She was scared of being exposed, scared of losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. She stayed on the phone for a while, but I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was going on. It was only a matter of time before her lies completely unraveled. I could feel it. She was almost there. By Monday, Amelia was barely recognizable. She moved through the house like a shadow, always distracted, always somewhere else. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she never looked at me while answering, always rushing off or pretending to be busy. She hadn't said anything about the anonymous tips I'd sent, but I could feel the tension mounting. Something was off. She was cracking. I came home early one afternoon, and when I walked through the door, I saw it instantly, the fear. Amelia was standing in the living room, her phone in hand, staring at it like it might explode. Her hand shook slightly, and her eyes were wide with something I hadn't seen in a long time, panic. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She snapped her gaze to me, and for just a moment, I saw the raw panic in her eyes before she forced a smile. "Yeah, fine. Just work stuff." Nothing to worry about. I said nothing. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her voice was too tight to be convincing. I could see it now. She was starting to break. She tried to walk past me, but her phone buzzed again, and she froze, staring at the screen with a mix of fear and frustration. Her face paled, and for a moment, it was clear. She was losing control. I need to go out for a bit, she muttered, snatching her purse and rushing out the door without another word. I didn't try to stop her. She could run all she wanted, but the truth was out there. She couldn't outrun it. I waited in silence for hours, the house still and empty. It wasn't until late that evening when she came back, her face tired, her posture stiff. She avoided my gaze, her eyes cold but weary. She had been trying to outrun something, but she couldn't anymore. I'm going to need to take some time off work, she said as she dropped her purse on the table, her voice tight. Too much pressure. Sure, I replied, not bothering to mask the bite in my tone. Everything okay? You look different. Her eyes flickered, and she quickly looked away. It's just work. Don't worry about it. But I could see it in her. The cracks were showing. She was losing it, and she knew it. The lies were catching up, and now she was scrambling to keep everything intact. That night, I made my move. I sent the final tip to her boss, this time making it look like a conversation between Amelia and a client about a shady deal. It was just enough to raise questions about her ethics, enough to get an investigation started. She didn't know it yet, but the net was closing in. The longer she ran from the truth, the harder it would be for her to hide. She was going to pay. But it wasn't about me getting revenge. It was about making her face the consequences of her choices, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the ruins of her perfect world. By Tuesday, I could feel the pressure mounting. Amelia was barely home, always busy with work or taking calls in private. The more she tried to act normal, the more obvious it became that something was seriously wrong. I said nothing, letting her hang herself with her own lies. But it was clear she was falling apart. That afternoon, she came home early, her face pale and her movements shaky. The second she walked in, I knew something had changed. She was trying to keep it together, but it was no use. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I need to talk to you, she said, voice tight, eyes darting around the room. About what? I asked, trying to sound casual, though I already knew where this was headed. She hesitated before speaking, words coming out in a rush. Someone's been sending anonymous tips about me, accusing me of unethical business deals, things that aren't true. I don't know who's behind it, but they're trying to ruin me. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to be surprised. What kind of tips? She shook her head, looking more desperate. I don't know, but they're threatening to expose me. It could ruin everything. I paused, staring at her. And you're sure it's not true? Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, her voice rising. Of course not. You know me better than that. I kept my tone calm, but the words felt like ice. Then you have nothing to worry about, right? She didn't respond, just stood there, shifting her weight. I could see it now, the cracks in her facade, the guilt in her eyes. She took a breath, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stood there, her posture tense, her hands trembling. Her perfect world was starting to collapse, and she knew it. I need to get to the office, she muttered, before rushing out without another word. I let her go, not saying a thing. She wasn't running to work, she was running from the truth. Once she was gone, I sat in silence for a moment. The panic in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't just worried about the tips anymore. She was scared of being exposed, of everything coming to light. She knew the walls were closing in. Later that night, I watched as her phone buzzed non-stop. Word was spreading. One of her clients had already pulled out of a deal, citing concerns over her ethics. Her world was unraveling, and I didn't need to lift a finger. When she came home that evening, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was trying to act like everything was fine, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Her voice shook when she spoke, her hands constantly moving as if trying to do something, anything, to fix it. But it was too late. Her perfect life, the one she'd spent years building, was falling apart. Word was already out about her shady dealings. Her colleagues were whispering. Her clients were backing out. She was losing control. I didn't say a word. I just watched as she crumbled under the weight of her lies, knowing that all I had to do now was sit back and let her destroy herself. The days that followed were a blur, but for all the wrong reasons. Amelia was everywhere. On calls, at meetings, barely home. But her usual confidence was gone. She was constantly stressed, always looking over her shoulder. It was clear to me, she was panicking. The perfect life she'd built was crumbling, and I didn't feel a hint of sympathy. She had brought this on herself. I stayed silent, letting her fall apart. It wasn't my place to confront her yet. The guilt, the fear, was already eating her alive. She had spent so long hiding her lies, pretending everything was perfect. Now, those lies were catching up, and I couldn't help but watch as she spiraled. Then came Friday, the real breaking point. I was in the living room when Amelia walked in, her face pale and tight with stress. She held her phone in a death grip, as if it might shatter. I didn't need her to say anything. The devastation was clear. "They've started an investigation," she whispered, voice trembling. "They're looking into everything. My clients, my colleagues, even my boss. I don't know how this happened." She stood there, waiting for me to react, but I didn't. I already knew the truth. "They've got proof, Dominic," she continued, panic rising in her voice. "This is all lies. Why are they doing this to me?" I said nothing. The satisfaction I felt was hard to hide. "Did you do anything wrong?" I asked, voice flat, like I was asking about the weather. "No, of course not." Her eyes were wide with fear, but the guilt was there too. "I'm not like that." I didn't respond. I just watched her unravel. She couldn't see it. She was so caught up in the fear of losing everything, she hadn't noticed she was standing in the wreckage of her own making. She spent the rest of the day on the phone, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation, but the damage was done. The investigation was out of her hands now, and I could see the cracks in her perfect life were widening with every call she made. The world she'd built, piece by piece, was falling apart. Later that day, I received an anonymous tip from one of her colleagues. The truth was out. Her career was finished. The affair, the shady deals, the bribery, everything was being exposed. The walls were closing in fast. By that evening, Amelia was defeated. She came to me, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. She didn't need to say anything. I could see it in her eyes. Her empire was gone. She had nothing left. "I've lost everything," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "It's over." And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't over for me. Her betrayal was no longer my burden to carry. It was her turn to face the consequences of what she'd done. I didn't need to say anything. I just let her stand there, broken. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The following days felt like a slow, inevitable descent. Amelia spent most of her time glued to her phone, chasing down leads, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. But it was clear she was losing the fight. The investigation had started, and her perfect world was slipping away. I didn't say much. She was already unraveling on her own. But I knew what I had to do. Finish it. Amelia was obsessed with her image. Her career was everything, and she'd spent years curating the perfect public persona. But that image was about to be obliterated. I had everything lined up. Now, it was time to push her over the edge. I forged an email from Amelia to a high-profile client, promising unethical favors in exchange for business, everything from inside deals to things that crossed the line. It was bad. But I made sure it looked real, with all the right dates and details. Then, I took the final step. I hacked into her social media accounts. I posted the email, tagging it with #TruthMatters and #exposed. I also shared some of her private conversations where she bragged about manipulating clients and exploiting them. In minutes, everything she'd built online started to collapse. Her followers began turning on her. The clients who had once praised her withdrew in disgust. Within hours, her digital life was in ruins. Amelia came home late that night. Her face was ashen, and her eyes were puffy from crying. She didn't say a word to me. She just walked straight to her office, slamming the door behind her. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The damage was done. I knew her business was in jeopardy, but now, everything she had worked so hard for, her image, her career, was gone. The clients who had once trusted her were now abandoning her, and the whispers in the industry were already growing louder. It wasn't just the affair anymore. The affair had been the spark, but it was the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal that had done the real damage. She had spent so much energy covering it all up, but in the end, it wasn't the affair that would ruin her. It was the mess she had made in trying to hold on to a life built on deceit. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to say a word. She was already facing the consequences of her own actions. That night, I felt a strange kind of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. The truth had come out, and Amelia was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. She had no one to blame but herself. And for the first time, I knew I was done. I was free. Amelia's world was falling apart, and there was nothing left for me to fix. Her empire was gone, and all I had to do was watch. The next few days dragged on, but I barely saw Amelia. She was either holed up in her office, on the phone, or running from one crisis to another. I think she was trying to hold it all together, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew it was over. I didn't need to say anything. The silence between us had become louder than any argument could be. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was always about her work issues or trying to justify the investigation. She still tried to act like nothing had happened, but I could tell she was terrified. By Tuesday, her world had shifted into chaos. Her business partners were backing out of deals, clients were sending angry emails, and the calls from her lawyer became more frequent. Everything was moving so fast. It was like watching a car crash happen in slow motion, knowing there was no way to stop it. That morning, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Amelia," I said quietly, trying to get her attention. She didn't respond, just scrolled through the same email thread for the 100th time. I could see the panic in her eyes, but she was trying so hard to maintain control, like she could fix everything with one phone call. She didn't even look at me when I said her name again. "Amelia," I repeated, my voice a little firmer this time. She finally looked up, and for the first time in days, there was no mask. Her face was pale, eyes wide, and her lips trembled as she took a shaky breath. She looked broken. "I didn't do this," she whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't do anything wrong." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disgust. She could still lie so easily, even after everything. "You're right," I said, my tone cold. "You didn't do anything wrong, Amelia. You did everything wrong." Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt, frustration, maybe a little bit of fear. But she didn't say anything. She couldn't, because she knew it was true. I watched her fall apart in real time, the weight of the lies she'd carried for so long finally breaking her. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, was now a shadow of her former self. As she sat there, defeated, I realized I didn't need to say anything more. She had lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her marriage. All of it was slipping through her fingers, and I wasn't about to try to fix it. I stood up, quietly. "I'm leaving for a while," I said. "I can't do this anymore." She didn't respond, didn't try to stop me. She knew. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, finally free from the suffocating grip of the life we'd built together. Amelia's world had collapsed, and there was nothing left for me but to move on. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It was over. The days after I left were a strange kind of stillness. I didn't go far, just rented a small apartment nearby, but it felt like a lifetime away from the chaos I just walked out of. Amelia didn't try to reach out, not even once. The phone didn't ring, no texts came through. The woman who used to fill the house with noise and demands was suddenly gone from my life. I didn't need closure or a confrontation. The silence said everything. I kept an eye on her though. It wasn't hard. Not with the mess she was in. Her social media became a war zone. Clients were dropping her. Former colleagues were calling her out. The facade she'd spent years building was completely destroyed. The image she'd so carefully curated for the world was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. The company she'd worked so hard to build was coming apart, too. An investigation had started, and now it wasn't just the affair people were talking about, it was the shady business deals, the lies, everything. I couldn't say I felt sympathy for her. Her fall was a long time coming. One evening, a message from an old friend popped up on my phone. "Hey, Dominic. I saw Amelia's name in the news." What happened? I didn't even have to think. The world was already talking. Everyone knew now. I sent back a short reply. She did it to herself. Simple. I didn't need to explain. The more I saw of her unraveling, the more I realized something. While she was sinking, I was starting to rebuild. It wasn't about revenge anymore. I'd gotten that. It was about moving on. I was free. I hadn't realized how suffocating our life together had been until I started breathing again. I picked up hobbies I'd forgotten. I traveled, spent more time with friends. Every day felt like a victory, like I was finally getting myself back. I had been trapped, but now I could move on. Amelia's first call came about 2 weeks after I left. Her voice on the voicemail was shaky, pleading, saying she was sorry, that she couldn't lose everything. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to say. The second call came the following day. This time, it was a text. "Please, Dominic. I'm begging you. I need you." For a moment, I thought about it. But then that thought faded. I had already made peace with everything. I was done. I hadn't realized it before, but I had already moved on. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet certainty. The life I had with her was gone. And I didn't need her to fall apart for me to feel better. What was there to say? She had made her choices. And now I had mine. I didn't need to fix her or save her. She was on her own, and I was finally free. I didn't look back. The truth had already won. Weeks went by, and life started to feel normal again, but not the same normal I had with Amelia. This was a new kind of normal, one without the constant tension, the lies, and the emotional exhaustion. At first, I missed the routine, the little things that had been familiar. But as time went on, I realized how much I had been suffocating. I didn't even know the weight I was carrying until it was gone. Amelia's world was still falling apart, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. Her social media was a mess. Clients who had once adored her were dropping her left and right. Her career was a wreck. The people who had admired her now saw her for what she was. Just another person trying to hold a house of cards together. And as she spiraled, I was living my life. My own life. For the first time in years, I was no longer defined by her mistakes or her drama. For a while, there was silence. No calls, no texts. But then the messages started. Short, desperate ones. "I'm sorry, Dominic. Please, we need to talk. I can't lose everything." I thought about responding once, maybe just to get some closure, but then I realized I didn't need it. She was still trying to manipulate the situation, trying to control how I felt about her, about what happened. But I wasn't interested. It hit me. How much of my life had been shaped by her lies, how much I had put up with to protect her perfect image. I had spent so much energy managing her world, that I forgot about mine. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just free. Then came the lawyer calls. She was trying to salvage whatever she could, but it was too late. Even when I did answer once, I heard desperation in her voice, asking me to help with the mess she'd made. But it was her mess, and no one could fix it. Not even me. I didn't need to say anything to her. She had already done the damage. It wasn't just the affair that had ruined things, it was everything she had built on lies. And once the truth came out, the house of cards crumbled. I started thinking about my future, but not in the way I had before. Before, my life was tied up in our plans, the dreams we shared. But now those plans didn't exist. I didn't have to think about what she wanted, what she needed. I could think about me. And for the first time, I realized how much I had been missing. I didn't need to waste another second on someone who thought they could lie their way through life without consequences. She had burned every bridge, and in the end, no one could save her. Amelia was a cautionary tale. A woman who had everything but lost it all because of the lies she had told. And me? I was just the guy who walked away, finally realizing that my life was mine to live, not hers. And I was okay with that. As the weeks turned into months, the pieces of my life slowly began to fall into place. It wasn't some dramatic shift. There was no big moment when I realized everything had changed. It was more like a steady, quiet realization that I was free. Free from the lies, the guilt, the constant drama. And free from someone who, deep down, had never really been the partner I thought she was. Amelia kept spiraling, but I wasn't a part of it anymore. Her calls, her messages, they kept coming, but each one felt emptier than the last. I stopped picking up. I stopped responding. I didn't need to drag it out any longer. One evening, a text popped up from a mutual friend, someone I hadn't heard from in a while. "Hey man, I'm really sorry about what happened with Amelia. Is everything okay with you?" I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I just felt indifferent. I typed back a short reply, "I'm fine. I'm doing better now." The truth was, I was doing more than just fine. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. I could make decisions for myself. I didn't have to worry about her needs or her drama. I started focusing on the things I'd put off, taking care of myself, getting back into my hobbies, rediscovering who I was outside of our marriage. I even started dating again, though I wasn't in any rush to jump into something serious. I had no interest in comparing anyone to Amelia. I didn't want another person who would lie, or manipulate, or hide things from me. But dating again felt good, just to be out there, enjoying myself, without the constant weight of betrayal hanging over my head. And through all of it, I watched Amelia's fall from grace continue. There were no more high-end dinners, no more fancy events. She was just gone. People stopped calling. Her reputation, once spotless, was now tarnished beyond repair. Her name was whispered in hushed tones, not with admiration, but with pity. I was never the type of person who took satisfaction in someone else's downfall. But Amelia had made her bed. She had chosen this path, and I had no reason to feel sorry for her anymore. It was strange, though, how much I had invested in our future, in the dream of us. I had wanted to believe she was the one. But in the end, I realized it wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that the person I had loved so much wasn't who I thought she was. The lies, the affair, the manipulation, they were all part of a larger picture of someone I had never really known. But that was all in the past now. I had started to rebuild my life. I wasn't just moving on from her. I was moving forward. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was just about me. I thought about the future sometimes, but I didn't dwell on it. Life was wide open. I was no longer tied to a woman who had never truly respected me. And that felt like a victory in itself. I didn't need to look back. I didn't need to keep wondering, what if? I was where I was meant to be. And I had learned something important through it all. Life goes on, with or without the people who try to break you. Months passed, and life felt different now. The weight I'd been carrying was finally gone. The constant tension, the lies. It was all behind me. I wasn't just moving on from Amelia. I was reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost along the way. For the first time in a long time, I was free. Then one afternoon, Amelia reached out. Not with a call or a text, but a long email. It was typical her, trying to explain, trying to make things right. She said things like, "I never meant for this to happen, and I didn't want to lose you." Same old lines. Same manipulation. I read the entire email but felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just indifference. I realized then that I had nothing left to give her. She wasn't sorry for the affair. She was sorry she got caught. She was trying to make me feel guilty, like I had some part in her downfall. I didn't respond. A week later, another email arrived. "Please. One last chance." This time, I didn't even open it. I deleted it without a second thought. I didn't need to drag this out. She had lost me. The silence from her felt like a weight lifted. I didn't need closure anymore. The truth had been clear for months. What she did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal, a reflection of who she truly was. And I wasn't going to waste any more energy on it. I sold the business we had built together. It wasn't about the money. It was about starting fresh. No more reminders of the lies or the past. I was ready to move on, and I wasn't going to keep clinging to something that no longer served me. Her career, I heard, continued to unravel. No more deals. No more public appearances. Her world had crumbled just as I knew it would. I didn't feel bad for her. She had destroyed it herself. The fallout was hers to face, not mine. It felt like a chapter was finally closing, and I wasn't looking back. I had learned something important. You can't fix someone who isn't ready to be fixed. You can't save a person who is determined to burn everything down around them. In the end, walking away was the best decision I'd ever made. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking control of my life again. I was no longer defined by her lies or the damage she caused. I was free to create my own future, and for the first time in a long time, that future felt bright. Months had passed since I'd fully let go. No more messages from Amelia. No more guilt. No more looking over my shoulder wondering if the past would come back to haunt me. And honestly, it felt damn good. The first few weeks after I'd left, I spent a lot of time processing everything. I wanted to know why I had stayed so long, why I hadn't seen the signs earlier. But eventually, I stopped caring. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was free. I started to rebuild. Not in some dramatic, life-changing way. Just slowly. I picked up the hobbies I'd put off. I spent more time with friends, the real ones who stuck by me through all of it. I found out that I liked doing things for myself, without checking in with anyone else, without the constant need to keep up appearances. I moved into a new apartment, one that was mine, all mine. It wasn't luxurious or anything, just a quiet place with enough space for me to breathe. It was mine. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I even started traveling, just small trips at first. Weekend getaways, short hikes to places I'd never seen. It was about finding new experiences, seeing the world outside the small, suffocating bubble I'd lived in with her. And then there was the dating. I didn't rush it. In fact, I wasn't really looking for anything serious, but I enjoyed the simple pleasure of getting to know people without the weight of a past I was trying to hide. I went on a few dates, had a few good conversations, but nothing felt like it needed to be anything more. It was just nice. I wasn't trying to replace her. I was just rediscovering who I was. The thing is, when you're in a relationship like the one I had with Amelia, you forget who you are. You mold yourself around that person, trying to be the version of yourself they need you to be. But once that person is gone, you're left with this empty space. The thing is, I didn't mind the emptiness anymore. It wasn't scary. It was freedom. It was room to grow. I saw a few mutual friends over time, and they would tell me what was going on with her. How she was still trying to salvage her career, trying to get back on her feet. Some were sympathetic, some just shook their heads, but I never let it bother me. She had made her choices. She had burned every bridge. And now, it was like I wasn't even part of her story anymore. And I was okay with that. One night, I was out with a friend, just having a beer and chatting about life. And it hit me, I had finally moved on. Not just from Amelia, but from everything she represented. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just living. And it felt good. I thought about what my life had been before her. Before the lies, the betrayal, the hurt. I thought about the future, not with regret, but with excitement. I wasn't looking to get back at anyone or prove a point anymore. I was just looking forward to what came next. I realized, for the first time in a long time, that I was enough on my own. I didn't need someone to define me. I didn't need her to define me. In the end, walking away from Amelia wasn't just the best thing I did for myself. It was the thing that allowed me to find the person I had been before I'd gotten lost in her lies. And that person was more than capable of creating a new, better life. And I was finally, truly free.